Hello and welcome, I'm Tim and this is TimBatSea. It's been a while since we've taken a trip up the East River, or at least posted one anyway. And so with the camera strapped outside the wheelhouse and things sped up at a factor of 4, I figured we'd take you along. So right now we are coming out of the Buttermilk channel, which is the southern channel, meaning you can go in the deep water side, which is around the Battery of New York, or you can go through the Buttermilk and connecting into here at the East River. And the first bridge here is the Brooklyn Bridge, and not only is this a good place to log that you're going through there, but it's also a time that we switch from channel 14 over to channel 12 and check in with VTS. They'll ask for things like a gate time, of what time I expect to be at the gate, and they'll tell me all the traffic that I'll be seeing along the way, and if somebody else is going to be at the gate or around there, we'll figure that out so that we only have one unit in the gate at the time. But anyway, once through the Brooklyn Bridge, we come up to the Manhattan Bridge. Coming through here. These docks on the left-hand side used to be what we call the banana docks. I haven't had bananas there for years, but that's where all the bananas used to be. We're going to be taking a left-hand turn up here around Collier's Hook. And on the right-hand side will be the Brooklyn Navy Yard. There is no actual Navy operations there now. It's all private. And there's some amazing graving docks, which are basically stone, a hole that they drive a ship into, and then they plug the hole up and pump the water out. And I think I've seen some of the best stonework I've seen in America there. I think it was built 100 or maybe even 200 years ago. I remember the last time I was there with another company, one thing that was interesting was that the bollards they used were old cannons that they cemented into the ground, and you just tie up around the cannon. The cannon would be mounted vertically into the cement. I always thought that was interesting. But anyway, like I say, beautiful, beautiful stonework that they used to do back in the days when guys used to do that sort of stuff. Real craftsmen. But anyway, coming around Collier's Hook here, and we're looking at the Williamsburg Bridge. I'd like to welcome the new viewers of the channel. Usually our channel is about boat handling and that sort of things, but every once in a while people find it interesting. The East River, and especially going through the gate, is something that's fun to do, and it was a beautiful day, so I figured we'd do that. Now coming up here, we have a choice. We can stay on the deep water side, and that would keep us to the right, and that's in the channel. Or we can do what we call cutting the flats, and that's on the left-hand side. Come up around by the 14th Street Powerhouse. And there's still like 20-25 feet of water in there, so there's plenty of water for a barge to, a tug and barge to go through. I usually don't take the flats unless I'm light, and that's usually just because we give the deep water channel to the deep water draft, and we also, I think tides and currents have a little bit to play in there as well. In other words, the tide and current going through an area that might be 40 or 50 or even 60 feet is going to be different than the water going over a 25 or 20 foot section. See another unit of ours coming down the other way. He's light and he took the flats. I'm following another unit behind here. Now it's interesting. I think I've told this story before, but after 9/11, I mean, it was probably a year after or so, I'm coming up here and I'm in the doghouse of the upper wheelhouse, which was of the boat that I was on. It was about the size of a phone booth. And I'm up there and they had 149 two-stroke diesels and they're going, wah! So I'm up there pushing 2 scows, going up the river, everything's fine. And all of a sudden I see there's like a flash, and it wasn't like a bright flash, it was like the sun went out for a second. And if you look straight ahead, that tall building there, kind of bluish windows, blue-green windows there, that's the UN up there. Well, anyway, I was like, what was that? And I'm looking out, and right over the top of me, I see a plane. And I mean, it seemed like he almost was going to hit my antennas. In reality, he was probably a couple hundred feet above me, but it scared me to death. And I see him, and he's aimed right for the UN. I was like, oh my God, it's happening all over again. Oh no. And then, of course, I realized that the plane has floats on it, and it's a seaplane, and he drops right in. Every time I come through here, I always remember how me, as a green mate, got all wigged out when that happened. Thought for sure plane was going to be going right into the UN. But we continue to see planes take off and land here. The airplanes actually make a security call on 13 when they're a couple minutes out, and they say what their intentions are. There's a helicopter port and a seaplane port up here on the left-hand side. And there's obviously a considerable amount of ferry traffic as well. One thing the camera's not showing is over on the right-hand side, out of frame from what you're seeing, is the entrance to Newtown Creek. And Newtown Creek is definitely a special place. But I have a video long time ago where I don't have my 12 trips in and out of Newtown Creek, so I had to bring another captain that did. And he brought us in there, and if you want to see that, you can probably do a search for Newtown Creek and see that. But we continue to go on, and we're monitoring things as far as the traffic from the recreational boats and the ferries and the commercial boats going here. Like I say, most of these are fine. The ferries that move back and forth, they're really cool. They know what's going on, and they kind of stay out of our way, and we try to make things easy on them. But we really try to keep an eye on things up at the gate, where we want to time this all right. Getting a better look here at the UN building. The UN building used to traditionally be a check-in point with VTS. Things have changed over the years with the addition of both chart plotters and AIS. I don't want to say that the role of VTS has been reduced. I'm just saying how much we rely on VTS has been dramatically reduced, only because we can see a lot of the things that they could only see before. With AIS, it'll tell us who we are looking at, the speed they're making, and even how much time we have before we'll be at our closest point of approach. So that's kind of a good thing. This is Roosevelt Island on the right-hand side. Start to see the FDR highway that runs up along the East River. As we make our way here, we come up to the 59th Street Bridge. Years ago, people used to call this the Queensboro Bridge, but I think most of us, and remember, if you live in New York and you call it something else, that's totally cool. I'm just talking about the vernacular we use in our industry. We mostly call it the 59th Street Bridge now. Do remember that we're moving at about 4 times the speed. that we actually made just so that this video wouldn't waste too much of your day. So some of you might wonder what our strategy is here, and any, especially New Yorkers that might be walking up the East River on one side of Roosevelt or on the FDR side, you might wonder why it is that sometimes you go and you don't see much traffic at all, and other times you see the boats all lined up together. And that isn't random. We do that based on the tide. And remember that in our vernacular, when we're talking about tide, we're really talking about the current. So if I'm pushing a loaded barge that might be drawing, say, 18 feet here, and I'm going up the East River, and the East River is ebbing from Long Island Sound, and the water's coming against us. We're battling a head tide here. It could be as much as 4 or 5 knots, and pushing against that not only makes us go extremely slowly, but it also is a hazard. There's some people that might say, oh, you'll steer better with all that. Yeah, you can steer better, but if you get 4 or 5 knots pushing on the 18 feet of barge that's, your whole unit's 450 feet long, once that thing gets grabbed by the tide, there's a whole lot of horsepower or rudder that's going to stop that thing from spinning right around. So that's something that we really don't want to do. And then the inverse is true too. If you're going with a fair tide, in other words, the tide was flooding to Long Island Sound right now, if I wanted to maintain 7 knots or something like that, 6-7 knots, and there's 5 or 6 knots of tide, in order for I would have to only have the power to do a couple knots, and that is not enough to steer. I need way. I need thrust from the propellers pushing against the rudders to move, to turn. And so what would happen is if it's flooding at like say 5 knots. It's flooding into the sound, and I need to make about 6 knots or so just so I have steerage. Well, I'm going to be about 11 knots, and there's a couple problems with that too, and that's that things happen very quickly, but you also have a lot of kinetic energy that's stored as you are moving all this mass at that velocity. Things that go wrong, or the actions you have to take to mitigate things going wrong, are greatly increased. So for the side of safety and keeping everybody happy, most of us want to go through at or around slack. And so slack water would be just the moment of time between the tide flooding and the tide ebbing. And we usually want to catch that slack right in the gate. And the gate is a notorious tough waters to navigate because there are 4 different bodies of water that come together there, and there's all kinds of whirlpools and swirls and all kinds of nastiness that happens there. So if we get there at slack water, it would be ideal in a perfect scenario that we would get to the most dangerous part with the least amount of influence from the tide, and that would be at slack water. The problem is you might have 10 different tugs and barges and all that sort of stuff all wanting to go through at that same time. So that's kind of an issue. So what happens is we usually go, and the people, in my case, I usually like to go, and if the tide is going to be against me, I want to get just at the end of that, maybe up to an hour before slack, and ideally maybe like 20 minutes before slack, so I'm still pushing through a little bit of water coming my way. Okay, so now we're coming at the end of Roosevelt Island. Gracie Mansion would be on the left. That's where the mayor of New York stays. Those 2 buildings on the right are relatively new. They just kind of popped up. And just on the other side of those 2 buildings, there's a ballpark. Sometimes you'll hear guys say, yeah, I'll meet you at the ballpark. Anyway, here comes another tug. He's coming this way, made up, looks like heads and tails. Yeah, heads and tails, and made up alongside. He's pushing through the gate. Always nice to see. And if you noticed, we lined it up so that we wouldn't see him right off of the ballpark or right at the gate, but right where he's lined up. Sometimes you come around with a fair tide and start sliding towards Gracie Mansion, but we got all worked out, and now we're off coming around the ballpark. You can't really see it over here, but the Triborough Bridge up ahead of us, followed by the Hellgate Railroad Bridge. Right about now is where we usually start to breathe a little better. Everything's good. The big whirlpool is behind us. We still have to get around the corner, but this is usually something that's not an issue. Ward's Island is what they call part here right on the left-hand side. On the other side of the railroad bridge, you'll see a municipal tanker dock, and that's a nice way of saying where they use big tankers to move the leftover stuff in the sewage treatment plants. So they go around to different sewage treatment plants and pick up the stuff that doesn't break down. Only God knows what they do with it after that. So this is kind of a self-deprecating story here, but whenever I come through here, I always remember doing this when I was a mate years ago. Just past the sewage treatment plant, there's another dock up there, and after 9/11, I remember, there was a lot of talk about that if you saw something, you should say something. And I was coming up here one night, and I'm seeing flames shooting 50, 60 feet in the air right at the end of the dock. I'm like, oh my God. So I called VTS and I said, hey, look, I don't know if you guys care about this or not, but it seems like there's a big fire over here at this dock. And they're like, where? Told them where. And then they were kind enough to point out that that's the Fire Training Academy, and they were doing some exercises there. So that was quite a while ago, but I always remember how stupid I felt after that. The Lawrence Point Powerhouse is on the right-hand side. And we're coming up to the brothers, the two brothers here. There's North Brother and South Brother, and you can go in between these two islands. In fact, I do that with my private boat. And the company I used to work for before I came to work for this company, that was a kind of standard practice for us. There is water for us to go through even with a loaded barge, but I think it really comes down to why push the envelope if you don't need to. In other words, going through there, it's very tight, and for a boat our size, yes, it can be done. But there's much more room going around North Brother Island, and so that's what we usually do. So even though you can do it, doesn't always make a good argument of why you should do it. Going around the island is the main channel is gives you many more options in case anything were to ever go wrong. The Bronx is off here on the left-hand side. Well, first of all, there's Sunken Meadow. Sunken Meadow, when we come the other way, is a place that we usually make a security call to let everyone know in the gate that we're coming that way. Like I say, not as important now that we have VTS, but before we had VTS, we really relied on hearing things. And a lot of times when we come through the gate, for I guess interference or whatever, sometimes it's hard to hear a guy on the other side of the gate, and it's not because it's so far in distance. I think it has to do with all the buildings and that sort of stuff. But anyway, VTS has made that a lot better. But that's about it. After here, we go through the Whitestone Bridge and then the Throgs Neck Bridge, and then we're out in Long Island Sound. But I hope you enjoyed this ride with us, even sped up at 4 times. Had to speed up the audio for a while there. When I do these voiceovers, sometimes the computer can't keep up. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please don't forget to check out SV Paquita. I'll put a link in the description. And if you haven't subscribed, please do that. And we'd love to have you on our Patreon team. All right, you guys take care. Be safe. And as always, I'll see you on the one.